Hi guys, my name is Matti Sulanto and in this video I have 7 tips for you on how to make sharp photos. But before I talk more about how to get sharp pictures, please consider subscribing to my channel and also activate the bell icon right there so you'll get notified whenever I post a new video. And I usually post on every Tuesday and every Friday. This may sound like I'm making no sense, but I'd like to start by saying that sharpness is overrated and way too many people are way too obsessed about this one thing. However, I also think that because our cameras, Lumix and all other cameras as well, are so capable these days, and it can be very frustrating if you feel that you're not getting the sharpness or sharp pictures. So here are my 7 tips to help you to get those sharp pictures and get over it, and maybe you can then concentrate on more important things in photography, like creating interesting content. So let's get started. Tip number 1, use a tripod. This may sound like a trivial old advice, but it's still the best way to find out what kind of sharpness your camera and lens are capable of. And I know so many amateur photographers who have never put their camera on a tripod. So if you really want to find out the maximum sharpness of your lens and camera, mount your camera on a good tripod. There are a couple of things, however, that you should pay attention to while you're at it. First of all, make sure your tripod stands on a firm ground. Do not make this test on a bridge or some other man-made structure that can move or vibrate, because that can ruin your shot and it kind of devaluates the tripod. And then remember to turn off the image stabilizer, and if you have a Lumix camera with a stabilized lens, remember to turn off both stabilizer on the lens and on the camera. And when you're done with this, remember to turn those stabilizers back on again, otherwise you might get shaky pictures. And then use a self-timer or a remote controller so you are not accidentally jolting the camera while you press the shutter button. Lumix cameras have a pretty good app that you can use to control your camera and also fire it remotely. But self-timer is also a good option. Set it at 10 seconds or 5 seconds if you have that option, and that'll also prevent the camera shake. And then if you're planning on doing this outside, don't do this in bad weather. If it's really like windy or rainy or something, that can also shake the camera, and it's not very nice to do this in a bad weather in the first place. And tip number 2, make sure you have the optimal aperture selected on your current lens to make sure you get the sharpest possible results. I just made a video on that topic recently. I'll put a link in the description so you can check that out if you're interested. But it's very important you have the sharpest aperture selected if you want to find out the sharpest results you can get out from your camera and lens combination. Lumix cameras also have a really handy bracketing feature that lets you bracket the apertures while you're shooting. You can access the feature in the menu, or you can program one of the function buttons so you'll have a quick access to that. It lets you bracket 3 or 5 apertures or all the available apertures on your current lens. It's also a good idea to bracket all apertures so you can find out the differences between the apertures. And if you're using the bracketing feature, I recommend you use the aperture priority mode, which is the A, of course. And the tip number 3, make sure your focus is on your main subject. To do that, select one single small autofocus point and move the focus point over your main subject and focus there. Don't let the camera choose the focus point, don't use face recognition or anything like that, and don't use the center focus point and then recompose That's also not a good method. Modern cameras let you choose the focus point almost wherever you want in the frame, so use that feature and move the focus point over your main subject and focus there. Also make sure that your depth of field covers the whole subject if your subject is very three-dimensional, or at least be aware that the areas that are not within the depth of field are not going to be sharp. The tip number 4, make sure you have the image stabilizer turned on. And if you have a compatible Lumix camera and lens, make also sure that you have the dual IS activated. Camera shake is probably the most common reason not to get sharp results. And Lumix cameras offer up to 6.5 stops of stabilization, which is amazing, and it lets you get away with really long handheld shutter speeds, even more than 1 second if you have steady hands. And other cameras have powerful stabilizers too, so make sure you'll take advantage of that and don't let the camera shake ruin your excellent shots. And the tip number 5. Make sure to use fast enough shutter speed. While the stabilizer can eliminate the camera shake, it can't stop your subject from moving. So if you have a moving subject, make sure your shutter speed is fast enough to freeze the action or freeze the movement. For example, a walking person typically needs something like a 1/250th of a second to stop or freeze the motion. But if you're shooting something like football, you may need something like 1,000th of a second. It's hard to say exact numbers for any given situation because, especially if it's a human movement or animal movement, the movement is not is it linear or something? The speed of the movement varies depending on which phase the movement is. So for example, if somebody is jumping up and down, he or she will virtually stop at the top of the movement and also at the bottom of the movement. But like I always say, experiment with different shutter speeds and different motions. It's easy enough to go out there and take pictures of walking people on the street and see what kind of shutter speeds you need to freeze the person. And the tip number 6. Use the lowest possible ISO in your current shooting situation. While it's not directly sharpness related, but the higher the ISO, the more noise and the more unsharp your image is going to look. So select the lowest possible ISO you can in your shooting situation. Of course, if you are in low light and you need to stop a fast motion or fast action, you can't really choose a low ISO, but choose the lowest you can. But then again, in low light, if your subject is not moving and you have the powerful stabilizer of your Lumix camera or some other camera for that matter, try and see how long shutter speeds you can hand hold. I think you'll be surprised, and if you can hand hold a longer shutter speed, you can lower your ISO. Whenever I'm, for example, traveling and shooting some nighttime cityscapes, I usually stay at the base ISO of 200 and I'm totally fine and I can get really nice pictures. And the tip number 7, discipline. Whenever you're out there taking pictures, be careful and concentrate on what you're doing. For example, avoid one-handed shooting, especially when the shutter speeds are getting longer, something like 1/60th of a second or longer. In such situations, I recommend you use the viewfinder if your camera has one and hold your camera in both hands. It can also improve your compositions when you are really concentrating and looking through the viewfinder and checking out what really is in the frame. Also learn to press the shutter so that you are not accidentally shaking the whole camera while you're pressing the shutter. You should be able to press the shutter with your 4 fingers so that there's almost like no movement at all in your finger and in the camera. So those are my 7 tips, and I hope they help you to get the sharpness you are after. But remember, when you are comparing your results with some other people's results you see online, most online platforms show pictures in rather small size, and that can make even mediocre results look quite good in terms of sharpness. The only proper way to compare 2 pictures in sharpness would be to have the original files on the same computer screen and view them side by side, or make same size print of both photos and compare the prints side by side. And it's also good to realize that some subjects will look sharper than others, even if the same absolute sharpness is there in both pictures. So the subject also matters a lot, how we perceive the sharpness in a photo. But don't get obsessed about the sharpness. There are so many other more important things in photography. And remember to enjoy your photography, have fun with your camera, go out and make some more pictures. But before you go, you may want to check out these 2 videos. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.